Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. My name is Stephanie Edmonds. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. To live free, you have to think free. And that is exactly what we are going to be doing here tonight. I am here with Murch. He's a friend who I've been going back and forth with on Twitter on all sorts of topics, but we always seem to come back to the topic of how do we revolutionize what we have going on here in the United States? What would a revolution look like in 2024 or just in the modern era? And we both have come to the conclusion that it is not going to look like 1776. So we're going to get into that tonight and we're going to talk about what we think it should look like and why we think it should look that way. And so thank you for joining me here tonight, Murch.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everybody who is checking in. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and leave us some comments. Let us know what you think. And so when we hopped on here, and I do think we had discussed this before, you mentioned that you're an immigrant, right? You
Yeah,
and I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
you're a chosen American," which is going to really, I think, bring a great perspective to this discussion and also just really highlight what this country is all about. It's not about your identity that you were born with. It is about certain fundamental values which we share, which I think in this day and age of the culture wars can often get lost. But I just thought that was really cool to think about and another angle that I hadn't really considered before you popped on here.
yeah. I mean, it is interesting because you hear it thrown around like somebody's American, somebody's un-American, and all of that. And it's like it becomes very hard to define what makes a country, right? Like okay, we're talking about patriotism and love for your country, but it's like, what is the country? And if we look at all the aspects that make it a country, like how many of us love what some people consider America, right? The government, we certainly don't love most of them. The people, it's like half and half. We're at each other's throats. The geographical, the topography, cool. It has beautiful nature. It has a lot of stuff. But then you go someplace and it's like, okay, I don't like the heat. I don't like the wet. I don't like the hurricanes and all that. People are arguing about constitution. People are arguing about this, that, and the other. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like a similar falls under similar definition of like, what do you consider home? Like, where do you feel like you belong? And it has that sense of belongings. And for everybody, America means a different thing. And to a lot of immigrants, America means opportunity that they could never dream about back home. And a lot of Americans, natural born Americans, don't appreciate that because to them, it's like, okay, we are entitled to these opportunities. We're going to take them for granted. So then next step is like, what do we feel entitled to in terms of the outcomes? But to a lot of people, like countries where they have a caste system or where they have a really strong economic, socioeconomic statuses and the divide between them, where you have like cronyism and you have people who there is no such opportunity. It's like you go to a different country and in here you can sit in there. It's like, oh, it's no big deal. We had a black president. There's a lot of places where there will, in the foreseeable future, there's not going to be a black president, and not even
Right.
hiding anything specifically because it's black. They would be like, nope, not working. My country, similar way. There's not going to be any president who is not a native, uh, one of the tribes that they have going for them, and it's going to be very heavily protected. And people are not allowed to be in certain positions of power. They're not allowed to possess certain wealth. Like you have a caste system in India. It's like you're born in the wrong family, you're screwed. You pretty much, there's no way out of there. It's not. There's no work hard and maybe get lucky and you're gonna, marry somebody from a higher family. It's like, no, they're gonna look at you and they're gonna be like, keep dreaming.
Right.
It's you come to
It
America and it's like it's
right.
not
It's I
guaranteed,
think
but
it's
it's like you
easy.
will get it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was gonna say it's
It's
easy for
possible.
Americans to
Like,
lose perspective, right? On
yeah.
what we have here versus other places. But now at the same time, I would say, and it's accelerated since COVID hit, the I do feel like we are getting hit more with the economic side of things, the cronyism, right? The inflation has really
Yeah.
exploded. Um, and we're extending ourselves out into all of these different wars and all sorts of things. So it's definitely a mixed bag. But I guess underlying it all, I do think that there is an idea that makes America, the United States of America, a special place and different from
Mhm.
anywhere else in the world where despite all of these not so great trends that we see going on, there are still a lot of opportunities and possibilities, and you are an example of that. And I love how you just have fully embraced those ideas. You have your American flag, you have your "Don't tread on me," and, um, and so obviously, being an American, even though maybe you're not officially, a citizen yet, right? But you are a permanent resident, you are a contributing part of our country. So in my book, that's pretty American to me.
Yeah, I have embraced that identity. I mean, it's kind of, I've been here about 18 years, and I like, from the beginning, I was a student. I landed in Texas. Obviously, like, you look around, and in the beginning, you don't know what to do with all the freedom. Like, and
Oh,
it's not
okay.
freedom like, oh, do whatever you want, but it's a lot more than what we had. So you start going looking around, and you're like, okay, you can do this, like, that's allowed, this is allowed. So in the beginning, it's like, you're a kid in a candy store, and then after a while, you're learning to appreciate it. So then you see other people saying like, oh, well, nobody should be allowed to do that. I was like, what do you mean nobody should be allowed? If you don't want to do it, don't do it. It's I mean, it's the best deal you can get. It's like, if you don't want something, nobody's forcing you to do it, well, for now. But ideally, that's what the liberty is supposed to be. And that's where it's like, and that's where actually my first brush with the whole political climate got into place, is when I saw what was possible here. And then I see people trying to legislate their beliefs, or they're like, oh, I don't like this, so we should make it illegal. And that's where I started seeing different things happening, and people are like, oh yeah, like, we don't like this is against my beliefs, and this is against their beliefs, so we should scrap it altogether. And I was like, there's no coming back from that. Like,
Right.
when you
Whether
when you make something illegal, it's a lot harder to decriminalize it later. I mean, look, like, it's been widely accepted that marijuana has medical benefits, and it's not as bad as they said it was. It's still not decriminalized on a federal level. It's still, they're still fighting with the scheduling of it. And you're looking at it as like, before you ban something, think about it. Think about it. Is it really necessary, or is it something you want in the moment? Because if it's
right.
something that's just tempting you, don't.
And when you ban something, that means that you are willing to use the force of government to enforce that.
Exactly.
And that means that you are paying taxes or somewhere, whether it's directly or indirectly, you are paying for that to happen. And there's so
Yeah.
much waste that comes along with that, of course. And I think more and more we are feeling the impacts of that today as our government is expanding, continuing to expand in size. You have all these agencies, and it's unclear. We were just talking about the CDC, and the CDC does not have lawmaking power. And yet, during COVID, it seemed like whatever they said was the rule of law. It was being treated as the rule of law. And we see other agencies where they make a rule, then they have the power to enforce the rule, and then they have the power to bring you to one of their little fake courts and judge you on that rule. And they've just
Yeah.
totally collapsed down the separations of power. And so I want to sort of get into that part of the conversation because listen, I love this country. I love the people here. but I think that we have some serious problems that are sooner rather than later going to come to a head. And I think that this conversation, it really started with us talking about the protests and
Yeah.
how oftentimes those people on the left will seem to get more favor from the government than those on the right. And now the Israel
Hmm.
Palestine thing, I think we're seeing a little bit of a variation from this left right paradigm. But generally speaking, if you look at the government's what they put out, right? The DHS and all of these things, domestic terrorism, it's heavily focused on right wing groups, on white nationalist types of groups. And
Yeah.
not so much as on these left groups, especially when it comes to Black Lives Matter and the gender issue. They give them a lot of leeway. And in fact, they often make policies that protect them or are for their side of the argument. And it j and what it does is it gets the group on the right very riled up, right? We saw January
Yeah.
6th. A lot of them go out, right? They think they're defending their government, and one thing leads to another. There's chaos, there's violence, there's people entering into buildings where they don't belong. And I saw sort of a similar trend. It didn't get quite to the same level, but down on the border, right? We saw a lot of groups
Hmm.
talking and organizing about we're going to go down there and we're going to defend our country. And while in one regard it's somewhat admirable, right? To be like we're going to go defend the
Hmm.
border, we're going to protect our country. I in my perspective, it seems like a trap. And I don't
Yeah.
think that picking up arms like it's 1776 is the way that we win, right? I don't think that's how we revolutionize our system and reset things. And you seem to be in agreement with me. So talk to me a little bit
Yeah.
about your vision for how we can save America, revolutionize America, reform America, whatever the wording is that you want to choose. But we have a problem. Our government is too big, they have too much power, and we, the people, need to do something about it. So, what is your vision? How do you see us affecting change, and why do you think that this is the proper way to go about it?
So in short, yes, like you said, going head to head with the government for one, kind of a fool's errand. But even if you believe that, oh, we all get together, guerrilla tactics, and we can take on the U.S. government, whether nobody knows if the military will join them or if it's going to be just against the federal law enforcement, one way or the other, it's nobody wins in a war. Nobody wins in an armed conflict, and especially here, it's not going to be pretty. And even if you technically win, which means maybe you get away with less losses or whatever objectives you accomplish, it's going to get messy. You will inherit a complete disaster. If you really want to improve your situation, that is not the way to go about it. And the more you do it, and it really makes it not as plausible if you think about how disorganized people are. And a lot of people think, oh, okay, we're going to hop in the trucks and we're going to go do something. At the same time, if the internet gets cut off or the cell services get cut off, you're stuck in there by yourself and you have no way of communicating. Like you're maybe somebody who knows, who has a ham radio, maybe it's able to contact a few people, but it's not going to be as organized as people think it is,
Right.
and it's going to be small communities kind of fending for themselves. But the bigger issue at hand, really, if you think about it, people like to look for enemies, and it's not to say that there aren't those who maybe are exploiting you, but before you find an enemy, you have to realize enemies exploit weaknesses, and a weakness has to be there already to be exploited. And that's what we have to start looking into our own culture and looking at, where are we messing up? Because the government is not coming at us and starts shooting at us, except maybe in rare cases where there would be like a bad shoot with a cop or something, which is it might be a trend, but it's kind of a series of isolated incidents. But it's not like all out war on the citizens, where it's like it's not an all out armed conflict. It's mostly that we have gotten to a point where we cannot, and when I say we, I'm generalizing, but generally speaking, American public is not able to live without government's assistance. We as a people, just thinking about from early days of humans, you strengthen numbers, you organize into a tribe, you do something, but you're able to kind of take care of yourself. You have more, your immune
Right,
system is
you have
stronger.
to get
You're
your
able to,
food, right? You're getting your
yeah,
food,
you,
you're getting your water, you're the one who's providing power to I mean, they didn't have
yep.
electricity until much more recently, but
But you learn
you
how to
were
make fire.
self-sustaining, right.
Yeah. And what ends up happening is that over time we have technology developing, which is what gave us a head start to become like top of the food chain. And but the tricky thing started happening is that every other species on the planet, aside from maybe the ones we have domesticated, but every other species of wild animals, they are constantly in this arms race against each other. They're constantly getting better. The viruses are evolving. They start killing off the animals who are not immune to the viruses. The rest of them who are immune pass on that immunity to their offspring, and they are in this arms race. And we as humans, we just let technological evolution take over and compensate for our, pretty much we have abandoned natural selection. In it, like a good example is our reliance on vaccination. um, and it is generally when we have discovered our humanity, when we said, look, we don't want to see our people dying, so we're going to do something about it. And doing something about it entails fixing the issue by use of technology, and not necessarily, because with animals, okay, COVID hits, whoever dies dies, whoever survives lives on, produces more offspring, the rest of them will have immunity to COVID. We sit here as like, okay, we have immunocompromised, we have people of age, we have kids, we have people, who need this vaccine, people who need medication, so we get them with medication. It's a short-term solution, which is good. We are humans, we have compassion for each other, but in the long run, what ends up happening is we have grown accustomed to that weakness. It becomes part of who we are, and we're like, okay, we're good with it.
Yeah,
And
I think
to
something
the point
maybe
where,
I was gonna say something I think that's even more, like, tangible is food. How to prepare
yeah,
food, how to use
yep,
food, how to e right? We instead of making sourdough bread, like, sourdough bread is, like, some special fancy bread. No, it's just bread.
yeah,
And every
yeah,
other bread that you make is made with this, like, quick yeast, or the fact that you could, use I remember growing up, like, and my I love my mom, like, but I remember that the idea of using, like, fat was like, "Oh, like, cooking in fat, like, that's crazy. Why would we do that? We'll use some synthetic oil that they made up." We've just lost connection with the earth and how we can use it to survive, and like you said, if they shut off the grid, are you gonna be able to stay warm? Are you gonna be able to cool yourself down? Are you gonna be able to get food? Are you gonna be able to literally do anything? No,
and
probably
it's not
not.
it's not it's not like we haven't seen anything like it. Like in Texas a few years ago, there was the cold snap,
Yeah,
and a lot of people were without electricity. And I had a couple of friends spend the night over at our place, because the electricity went out and it was cold, and it's Texas, we don't like cold over there. So they're like, okay, dude, I need some help, come with. I'm like, come over, everybody who can come over, stay at my place. So we stayed there. But the reaction to it, once it's passed and everything normalized, that these people didn't even buy candles after that. They were like, "Nah, we'll be all right." The How many people I took to a gun range before COVID happened, and I told them, get a gun just in case, especially the women. We were practicing shooting. I said, get yourself a firearm, get yourself some ammo, do some training. Training is important. That a lot of people neglect that. They buy a gun, they don't know what to do with it. They don't.
right.
Maybe they know how it operates, but shooting a gun is a lot trickier than just pointing and pulling the trigger. Didn't do any of that. And it wasn't until people started getting their behinds whooped over sanitizer and toilet paper that people suddenly started rushing to gun stores, and it would be like a line going around the corner to a gun store. Why? Because people suddenly figured out that when it matters, a 9 millimeter works better than good vibes. And but by then, it's already it's late. It's late
Right.
by then.
Right. And so what
So
you're saying basically is that, we want to look and point to the government. Oh, the government's doing this. They're oppressing us in this way. They're making this dumb law. They're stealing our money through taxes. And those things are all true. But maybe you
yep.
need to look at yourself, and maybe the government is just a reflection of how little that we actually take care of ourselves, and not just like in a physical health way, which I mean, even that in and
Also,
of
yeah,
itself, I mean, we're so unhealthy as a nation.
yeah,
But just like your ability to function in life if that government wasn't there. Um, and so that's sort of the things that we have been talking about, is that the real revolution is you being able to survive on your own, right? If things were to hit the fan, would you be able to
yeah.
survive? But even more than that too, I think it's just like I know this with the education, right? Because I was a teacher, and we're so reliant on the school, not just for teaching our kids, which a lot of it is. A lot of parents have this idea that, they need teachers to teach their kids and they don't have the ability to. But also, just we've built our life around this. Mom and dad both have to work, so school's not just education, it's a place for your kids to be, hopefully under a careful, watchful eye, though, again,
Well,
we've
they're
sort of.
raising your kids at that point.
Right, we just take this
Yeah,
for granted, and it's just become so normal, and then when you ask people like, "Well, why don't you homeschool?" They say, "Well, I can't." Right? Or like,
yeah.
"Why did you, with the vaccine stuff," right? Like, I chose, and I know different people have different situations, and like, no individual judgment, but at the same time, I feel like people were really quick to say, "Well, I have to get it because I have to have my job, because I have to pay my mortgage, and I have to, pay for this and that." And I had all those things too. I have a mortgage,
Yep.
I have a son, I have other bills and that are coming due, but you either make the choice to figure it out regardless, or you say, I can't, I guess. And I feel
And
like.
and that's a good
Good.
example, because again, that's another thing that where it got tested is like, if you need a job so bad that you are pretty much, even being against it, you sacrifice your health for it. Because like I told you before we started, I was put in a similar position, but it was my legal status on the line. Pretty much, they said you have to vaccinate if you want to apply for a green card. And
So
even
so
even though the doctor, yeah, the immigration doctor said in my normal practice, I would never advise anybody, because I've had COVID 3 times by then. I was fine, natural immunity all the way, 3-0, undefeated against COVID. And he's like, I wouldn't recommend it, but the CDC forces us to require that. And, but when you have like your livelihood, like what is on the line for you? And if you would sacrifice your health because you don't want to lose your job, well, they can hold that job over you at any point. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you have nowhere else to go, no way for you to get food, no way for you to find shelter other than pretty much working, I mean, they have it over you, and that's their leverage. The leverage is that we need them, and it's like people say, like you mentioned, like they blame the government for this, that, and the other. And but at the end of the day, that's what any government does. Is that any government, if you keep relying on them more and more, you make it your daddy, and eventually it's going to start acting like your daddy. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. No government really becomes tyrannical when they feel like it. They become tyrannical when people let them, and people let them through soft means, pretty much relying on them. And that's not to say like, oh, get away from me and I'm not going to do this, that, and the other. Is that a lot of people put themselves in a position where they have no other choice, where they're like, oh, I can't take care of myself. I can't, and a lot of them just don't want to be inconvenienced. It's like, oh, I do not want to
Yes.
live below my means. Everybody thinks they are entitled to whatever their neighbor has, and nobody thinks about the fact that their neighbor is up to his ears in debt to get that cool car. But they're like, Joe has a cool car. I want a cool car. Well, my worse than Joe. So now both of you are in debt. And again, we're going back to being reliant on this technology, and all of that technology is produced by corporations who are in turn regulated by the government. And government is like, hey, you like your cell phone? If you don't do what we tell you, we're going to shut off AT&T. What are you going to do then? It's like, there's no Instagram. You're not going to be able to tell anybody about how your post-apocalyptic adventure going. And for a lot of people, that's enough to shut them down. And they're like, yeah, I'm not doing anything. I'm sitting at home like the government tells me to. So, but it's coming to a point where it's like, why are we there in the first place? Because the best way to resolve it peacefully is for us to understand not the battle that is going on, which a lot of people think is the left versus the right. It's like, but we are so desperate to gain control of the government that favors our values because we have already lost the major battle. And the major battle being that we have lost our independence and we are now reliant on the government. So now that we have accepted that we are reliant on the government, now we're like, okay, well, it might as well be our government. And so it's more at stake now, so people start going against each other and it gets violent because everybody's like, okay, if the government that is elected is not my government, things are going to be worse for me because it's become so polarized. In the meantime, it's a saying that goes around a lot in like libertarian community, where if you would not want your opponent to have the political power, maybe the government has too much political power. It's like
Mm,
if you're not ready for people who you disagree with to have that power, then perhaps it's too much power. But people don't think about it that way. People want to push for more power when it's their guys running the show, and that's effectively how we've gotten to the abuse of power and pretty much the expansion of the government is because whoever's guy in charge at the moment, they're like, give them more power. Is it Trump? Give Trump more power. Is it Biden? Give Biden more power. And we keep pumping up the government because we want them to fight our battles. In the meantime, we're too lazy to look in the mirror and say we have to be fighting our battles.
yeah.
The
But
government has
not
the leverage because we need
right,
them to.
right. And when we say fight our battles, we're not talking about, again, taking up
No,
arms
yeah,
and doing a 1776 style revolution. We're talking about the everyday battles in your life when it's anytime you interface with the government. And that's literally from the streets that you drive down. I know in my city, they are totally doing all of these new roads and um, making some roads smaller and expanding out the sidewalks so businesses can put up more restaurants, which I guess it's like kind of nice, but if you're a driver, it's annoying. Another thing that they're doing is they're putting up all these no turn on red signs. And I get it
mm,
if it's a blind corner, but I'm saying every single corner they're putting up one of these signs, and also those left turn arrows where it's like red and you can't, you know how, like, there'll be, like, a green arrow and you can go when it's green, but then usually
yeah,
the arrow goes away and you just have to sit there and you'll have to wait until it's clear and then you can make the choice to go? No, they're turning them into red arrows where you can't even make the choice to go if there's nobody crossing the crosswalk and no cars going. And so it's just little things like this that, again, you have to think about you're interfacing with the government when you go to school, when you go to the DMV to get your driver's license. And now I'm not
yeah,
suggesting that you quit doing all of these things. Like, pay your taxes, pay as little as possible. But, pay your taxes, obviously, like, keep your driver's license in good standing, but also build up alternatives. So in my case,
yeah,
my son, I homeschool him, and so we are building our own community. We're building our own church. And that's what I'm heavily invested in, and divesting my time and my money from the government alternatives. I still have to
Yeah.
drive on
Yeah.
the roads, trying to figure out how to, like, not have to deal with that, but you still gotta use the roads for
But
now.
yeah, at this point, we're not going to be completely disconnected from the government services in near future, because it's, I mean, it's everywhere. It's not necessarily bad either. So there are some things, but like in a free market economy, right? If the product is not working, you stop buying it, and the necessities will be decided by the choice. And when you're starting to see problems in the government, is like when something doesn't make sense, because ultimately it's an operation on a large scale, and a large scale operation usually will cater to the lowest common denominator. That's why they'll put those things. Somebody said, some pencil pusher over there said, okay, put the no turn on red signs everywhere, and they're not going to investigate it and look at it case by case. They're just going to say, just do it that way.
Well, their
um
buddy works over at the no turn on red sign store, and so they
yeah.
got the cushy government contract to put those up. I'm curious, on your perspective on voting. Now, I don't you can't vote. I don't know, maybe you can,
No,
like,
no,
one of those
I think
mail-in
I can
ballots.
vote in the state of Arizona. I'll need to check that. But I moved here a couple years ago. I was moving right when the gubernatorial elections and the midterms were taking place. At that time, I couldn't vote. I would need to check. I'm pretty sure I can vote in the state of Arizona, but I cannot vote in federal elections.
Right. Okay, so
Um,
what is your perspective on voting? I guess voting specifically, but more generally just the electoral process and how much time and energy we spend tracking it, talking about the candidates, and then of course getting out to vote.
um, I mean, I think it's a disaster in a way. We have seen it several times already, where you would think that it's an important process, right? It's in any sort of democracy, whether it's direct democracy or representative democracy, anywhere where people's citizens' votes count, you would want to approach it with, with some scrutiny. You want to approach it with some reliability, and so far we have seen on both sides attempts to cheat, attempts to stuff ballots, do whatever it takes. And honestly, you're looking at the processes and you're like, well, this is not reliable. Like, somebody's going to be disappointed, especially if everybody's in their own echo chamber and they think that their candidate is going to win. Somebody's going to be mad. I mean, it's going to happen, because when people are calling for things to be fixed, they're not fixed. Arizona is a good example of that. People have been complaining about it since Joe Biden got Arizona in back in 2020. People were complaining. Nothing happened, and then you have the elections, gubernatorial elections, where Katie Hobbs, who was, I believe, a secretary overseeing the elections, and she's in the running. Like, you would think that somebody like, and a lot of people on the right obviously were upset about that and they noticed, but really it is a conflict of interest. How are you overseeing the elections and you are in the elections? Like, you're pretty much refereeing your own game at that point. Like,
So
so
do you think that people should divest from that, like how we're talking about try to use as little government as possible? Do you think that people should also just, like, not pay attention to the elections? Like, maybe vote, maybe don't vote, but just like how try not to use the public schools, try not to use whatever other public services there are, right? It's treat it like a free market. If you don't like a product, don't use it, even though you have to pay taxes. Is that how we should think about elections, or do you think that there still is
I don't
value
think.
in participating in the system with as intensely as we do?
No, I don't think boycotting elections altogether is going to help, because that just gives the other side a legitimate win. Pretty much, if it was a situation where everybody knew that, hey, all citizens agree, because it becomes like the prisoner's dilemma, right? Where you do what's good for you, because if you don't do what's good for you and your opponent does what's good for them, then you're screwed. And there's no way uh, this many people can coordinate amongst themselves. 300 some millions can say together is like, hey guys, let's not vote. If there was a way to verify that and say, like, let's boycott voting, it would be an interesting time. But I don't think that is a smart way to go about it. It's at least for now, there are people who are still trying to make something of it, and at the very least, there's still merit to it. There's still value, even though it's I mean, the way it's handled is terrible. But giving it up like that, I don't think we should guilt people into voting like it's been done before, when we're like, oh, you don't get to complain if you didn't vote. A lot of candidates, you're looking at them and you're like, okay, well, I can't in clear conscience vote for either one of these guys. I'm more frustrated by the way they kind of present the candidates to the American people. It's like what was kind of frustrating for me going to school here in America is that back home we have everything is sort of you show your work, you show your thinking process. It's an essay, it's a presentation. I came to America and people were terrified of giving presentations. Back home, our midterms and our graduation exams every year was, you come to a desk, there are cards flipped upside down, you pick a few cards, you look at the subject that's on them, you go in the back of the class, you have 15 minutes to write some notes from your memory, and then you come over and you present it to the teacher. It's like a presentation on the spot. You have 15 minutes to come up with the material from your head. Here, they give you like a week in advance, and people are still freaking out about it. But the part that's like very frustrating is that they are conditioning people to operate within the given options. It's the multiple choice. And that's where the elections are. I mean, how many times we've heard people saying is like, well, why don't you put this guy on there? A lot of people wanted to see Ron Paul back. What is it, like a few election cycles ago? A lot of people nowadays want to see more options than Democrats and Republicans. A lot of people want to see libertarian candidates, the independents, et cetera, et cetera. But it's becoming like a um, sponsored pageantry, sort of, where you have
Yeah.
people coming in who are allowed to be in the club, and they're like, okay, these guys are going to be your choices, you have to choose between them, and you're like, what if I don't like either one of those guys?
Right. Well, that's why I like sort of, well, at least on the national level, right? On the national level, I'm trying to like spend very little of my time. I may or may not
Yeah,
vote for president. I'll probably vote for the libertarian candidate. That's what I've done the past several elections for
yeah.
president. But I think, at the local level, there's probably a little bit more that can be done. We have a question here. Why do you think so many people are against paper ballots without machines? So going old school.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not again. It's kind of not my battle, because I can't vote yet anyways, and
Right.
I know very little about the paper ballots and the machines. But whether it's paper ballots, whether it's machines, I mean, we've seen that machines fail. We there was a implications, or people were saying that machines are getting rigged. I can't really speak to that. I don't understand any of it, but
Right.
paper ballots definitely can be set
Yeah,
up. Honestly,
there's
like, here's a controversial idea, right? Like, I was thinking about it the other day. It's one of those shower thoughts, kind of, you sitting there, drift away.
yeah,
And I was thinking, it's like the only way to ensure fair elections at this point, and honestly, does not seem like such a radical idea to me. The more radicalized we are becoming against each other, is to have a very transparent election, because by this point, most of us are so vocal about how what we
right.
believe
Like a
in,
straw
that we're
poll,
open
like
about it.
where you just like go and you
Basically,
gotta raise
just
your hand.
no more anonymous elections. everybody's name is out there. You go in there, you're like, "Where's my vote?" Okay, that's my vote. I know me. I know that's who I voted for, and it's like totally verifiable. I mean, there are issues of somebody. Maybe it's like people who are not supposed to be there, right? Like there are people.
Right, you would have to
Uh,
verify who they are, I guess, first. I know that
yeah,
it and I think that it's a great point. At the same time, I think anonymity is so important, and, like, when you start making people have to have their face out there, maybe it makes you more susceptible to backlash,
yeah, yeah.
but, yeah, I mean, it's hard to
And that's what I'm
say, and
saying.
I
It's like
yeah, and I
it's a
think that
controversial idea.
yeah, and when you have a country of 300 and whatever we were at, 350,000,000 people versus back in the day when the country was founded and there was, like, I don't know, what, of 6,000,000 people or something like that, like, a massively we have a massively larger population, and so all of these issues are scaled up, and I think that's part of the problem too is just I mean, I don't think we have a population problem in the way that, say, like, Bill Gates thinks that we have a population problem, but, we have to think about practicality of doing some of these
Yeah,
ideas too. I wanna transition over more to the economic side of things and
yeah,
talking about how can we more effectively trade with each other? Because one of the big problems that I see in the economy is the government is just stealing so much of our money, right? Through
yeah,
taxes, through inflation, and then there's like if you use a credit card, the business has to pay credit card fees, and
yeah,
there's just all sorts of ways where so much of the value of our money is being stripped away. And of course, if you're constantly out there looking for money, then it's harder to think seriously about some of these ideas and you're more at the whim of the government. And I know that you have some creative and have thought a lot about the economic side of things. Oh, I did want to hear
yeah.
put up Turable said that he's a Ron Paul guy. He's from Kentucky.
It's probably the last candidate that would get me, if I could vote, would get me off my ass going to actually vote, because since then it was like, I would, you know,
Rand is okay. He's all right. He's all right. He's no Ron, but you
but
know.
I don't think he's made to the end. Has he ever made it to like the end
I don't
game?
know if Rand Paul, Rand Paul, his
Yeah,
son has never run for president. I was actually kind of hoping that he was going to throw his hat in the ring
I
this
like
year because
I,
he
I
got a
like
lot of
Rand Paul.
national
I like
attention.
Thomas Massey is pretty
Oh
cool.
yeah, Massey's good.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I like some of the stuff they're doing, and I mean, much of the rest of Republicans or Democrats just seems kind of be playing on the same team, just like, okay,
Yeah.
our turn, no, our turn, and every 4 years they're just alternating doing the same thing. It's like, okay, my turn to be the villain, and your turn to get these suckers. I'm the bad cop now, and you're the good cop now.
Fact check. Rand did run for POTUS, but I guess he didn't make it that far into the point where I didn't know about him.
And that's the thing. It's like if it was at the end, right? If he was in the end, I would definitely go, if I could. Again, if I could, I would go for Rand Paul, Thomas Massey. There's a few names here and there, but
Listen, I'm
majority of
sure if
them
you
just
ask,
like,
they'll give you one of those mail-in ballots. All you gotta do is just ask.
last thing I need is get in trouble with Uncle Sam right now. It's like, fingers crossed. I'm waiting
Yeah, yeah,
till
you
my
can't vote for the
citizenship
wrong
gets here.
person, I guess. If you're gonna use that mail-in ballot to vote for the wrong person, then you can't have one.
And it's, yeah, it's one of those things where it's no, it's getting just too much of it. But speaking economically, right, like you said, a lot of it is just being eroded. But what's interesting is, I started thinking how money came about to begin with, because money was introduced a long time ago, the concept of money, and before that, money replaced barter. And a lot of there were a lot of shortcomings with barter. um, Namely, you can look at the main three functions of money, right? You have store of value. So in a sense that if you're trading tomatoes and I'm trading beef, for example, is like your tomatoes will go bad. Back then there was no refrigeration. Your tomatoes will go bad after a while. My cow might get sick and die, etc. But money was durable, and money, you trade a couple coins or pebbles or whatever it was at the time, that money will stay around and it will be there until you need to trade with something. Second function of money is a unit of account, right? So it's easier to count money if you can put everything in the as the yardstick, sort of, where that you measure everything, the value of everything by. It's more universal a unit, and it's very incremental. And you have a medium of exchange. So again, if you're trading tomatoes and I have a beef, and you coming to me with 2 pounds of tomatoes, you say I want a steak. I only have a whole cow. Is like, I'm not killing a whole cow to give you a steak, because then I have to figure out what to do with the rest of the cow, and the barter was inconvenient. Um, and over time, where we're looking at it now, because back then money was backed by some kind of an asset, right? Especially when the currency came out, it was like US dollar was backed by gold for the longest time. And now it has become a complete fiat currency, in the sense that it has only as much value as, not necessarily the government says it has, but as much value as people say it has. And people's trust in US dollar has been dwindling, because they see that the government will print it at will. They will do whatever they want with it. And effectively, they track it, control it, do whatever with it. So then you're looking at your US dollars, and it's like, well, it's going to be kind of useless if the government wants it to be useless. So, and then you start also looking at what happens to those things, like the store of value. Well, the inflation is going out of control. Maybe not right now, it's stabilized more or less, but there's no telling that it won't in the future. As it's getting out of control, as people have less and less faith in it, you're like, okay, well, what is the store of value good for? I'm not going to, if I get a hold of $1 million right now, do I really want to keep it in a savings account somewhere, and knowing full well that in a year that $1 million is going to buy me what $1 million buys me today? Not a chance. I'm going to try to buy something tangible with it. I'm going to try to buy some land, buy something else, and some intangibles. Like, some people are into cryptocurrency. I don't like it, but people seem to find value in it, because to me it's kind of similar area as a fiat currency. It's like, it's not tangible, it has no intrinsic value, but people like it because it's decentralized and it's not controlled by the government. Although some people have
Right, and
proposed
it's
that maybe.
really it does have the advantage over traditional money, I think, in the area of the ability to trade, right? You can send cryptocurrency essentially instantly, whereas, money, even if it is in paper form, you'd have to be, like, in person to trade it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I'd say that's
Or if it's
probably
electronically, it's tracked. Like, if you do a wire
right,
transfer, or
electronically it's tracked, and it's like, is it really anything then? Is it just
and
feels like it's
you will get taxed simply for
yeah.
transaction. It's like if you think about it, I don't know if that's how it is right now, but when I was into cryptocurrency a few years ago, you send money and there's like, they charge you gas or whatever it was called, but it's pretty much you have to pay in crypto to send crypto. And it's like, well, that's what your sales tax and your other taxes are nowadays, when you're sending money, because you get paid, you get taxed. You own something, you get taxed. At which point is like, do I really own it, or do I just rent it from the government? You buy something, you get taxed. You sell something, you get taxed. And it's like, you get taxed at every step of the way. The more steps you take, the more you are taxed, which is not good for the economy, because you need to have that velocity of money. You need to have, it's a blood flow of the economy, it needs to be moving freely. And their government introduces these little blockages. So you have clogged arteries right now, so to speak. And that money is getting siphoned out. You're bleeding profusely. You have internal bleeding while your blood is circulating. So if you look at it in that way, and a lot of people have become so accustomed to the idea of taxes, they're like, they can't imagine life without it. And the way I like to explain it is like, okay, if the taxes were 100%, it would mean that you're working for free, which would basically make it indistinguishable from slavery. So then, by definition, the tax rate becomes the percentage of slavery you're willing to endure.
We're only 25% slaves.
We're 25% slaves, but the master is going to build the road, so we're okay with it, right? It's like that's where it comes down, where people are like, okay, they're going to do good things with that money, but they don't. They don't. And recently was I don't know if you saw it. It was one of the Congress people, I think, was asking the rest of the Congress, or maybe it was some kind of committee, but he was holding a bag with washers that they use. I want to say in some Air Force construction. Maybe it's the planes, maybe something else. But he's holding a bag. It's not big. It's like stuff that you will find at Home Depot, maybe like $30, $20. And he tells them is like it's a stamped out of basic steel. It does not require any highly skilled labor. Machine stamps them out by thousands a day. How much do you think the U.S. Air Force is paying for them? And everybody was like, well, we don't know. He says $90,000 for that little bag of washers. And you have government contract, right? Like you said, his buddies working out there with the "Do Not Turn on Red" sign stamping facility. So once you get the government contract, it's already known like how much they're overcharging. If you want to audit the government and where that money goes, the amount of money that the tax revenue that the government gets and the work that they get done, our roads should look perfect by now. They don't. Infrastructure is crumbling. There's a lot of money that's going overseas, probably ends up back in the pockets of our esteemed representatives. So you're looking at it and you're like, okay, like what are we really doing here? Because honestly, like if we were more organized, suppose we as citizens of the United States, all 340 some million of us, decided that, hey, why don't we just chip in that money and get that stuff fixed? I'm pretty sure we could have done a better job. I'm pretty sure we could have put together some money and we were like, okay, who can build roads? It's like, okay, we're gonna go out there and we're gonna pull some money together and let's build a road and like community by community, brick by brick. But we have that centralized government who basically says, hey, everybody give us this money and then we're gonna get that stuff figured out. And then when
Right.
you're not happy about it, you can't do anything about it. It's like the only business where the seller doesn't have to perform. They're like, we'll get to it when we get to it, and if you don't like it, you still have to pay us.
Right. And so
Like you're
obviously we
losing
still have
control.
to pay our taxes now, right? We
Yeah,
still the government's gonna be building the roads. But I think that there are ways that we can look to engage more in barter. Obviously, it
yeah,
has its limitations, as you were saying, whether it's perishable goods or it's just hard to quantify what one service or product is compared to another service, and how do you trade them if one has way more value than the thing that you have. So there's certainly some hurdles to get over. But I think
yeah,
that this is probably one of the easier, like, lower barriers to entry to do, right? You don't have to take your kid out of the public school and rebuild your whole life around this homeschool. Maybe it's just a neighbor who does hair, and
yeah.
you have, I don't know, vegetables that you're growing in your garden over the summer, and so
You
you
may
can
have
give
a pool cleaning business.
there
You
you
may be
go.
a mechanic. You may be doing like, especially with the trade jobs, right? You will have people, and really actually like a good to build a community, which is something that we need to start focusing on again. Like, do you know who your neighbors are? Do you know who the people in your community are? And if you have a mechanic, it's like, okay, dude, like change my oil and I'll bring you some food or something. And because again, technology has evolved so much that goods, like back in the day, you couldn't, I mean, you could probably dry some of your food. You can easily dry it at home now. You can can them, you can preserve them. You have incremental goods that you can trade with each other, being in like small quantities. You will have like friends that you can trade ammunition with, you can trade other stuff, whatever you can find yourself, because again, if it has intrinsic value to it, then it's not just a token. And some people would just trade some sort of tokens amongst themselves, but at the end of the day, it's like it's better when you have intrinsic value attached to whatever you
Right.
use as a currency. Um, in that sense, I mean, I don't know how legal it is, but some people will trade back home antibiotics, sugar, salt, painkillers, all kinds of stuff. It's practical, right? And it
Tobacco
becomes,
historically has
yeah,
filled the place of currency. I know in like Weimar Germany, even here in the United States, we've gone through several iterations of central banks. Apparently, the lesson wasn't learned well enough, but I think it was like post-Revolutionary War, the barter economy was super hot because that's where it
yeah,
says there's a saying like it's not worth a continental because that was the dollar at the time and it wasn't worth shit after the Revolutionary War because they blew up the fiat currency like 3,500% or something insane. And so it was
yeah.
like tobacco, cotton, and these types of goods were actually functioning as currency.
Yeah, yeah, and like, why wouldn't they? Because again, like it's like you had the massive hyperinflation in Zimbabwe. I think in Zimbabwe they had to tell people to not use money as toilet paper because money was worth less than the toilet paper. It was something to that extent.
Clogging up the
But
toilets. I got me
speaking
and
of
my $10 trillion
inflation,
bill.
yeah. Speaking of inflation, I think one aspect that is often not talked about, because generally everybody who has a gripe with inflation is usually talking about the government irresponsibly
Turbo's
printing.
got
But
the
yeah,
moonshine.
alcohol. Yeah, that was the prohibition era. Alcohol
Yep.
is pretty much your currency. But yeah, when we're looking at it, I think a big problem that we have as far as inflation goes is also the third party payer problem. And that is when a third party picks up the tab, then the service provider or the goods provider becomes free to charge whatever they feel like. And that's, we saw that case with healthcare and when insurance picks up the tab, automotive when car insurance picks up the tab, universities when the student loans practically guarantee, the government program guarantees the loan. So why wouldn't the university charge crazy amounts of money when they know somebody else picks up the tab? Which in the short term it sounds like a solution. Okay, I'm given an opportunity. In the long term, you are you're going to pay for it. My economics professor, when I was going to school, he often said that free is the F word of economics, because nothing is free. At some point, maybe not you, maybe somebody else, but chances are also you will pay for it. And credit system is another big culprit of it. Is that we the amount of stuff we're buying on loan, right? We are buying the houses, like every time house market booms, we're buying houses at this point, and to us it has become the norm, but we're buying houses for that are priced well beyond our means. And the only reason they can charge it is because people will go in debt for 30 years to pay for it. And for 30 years, you will go in there and your mortgage payment is like $2,000 a month. You think about it, you will spend so much money over that time, that just to have a roof over your head.
Right, and
Whereas
the reason that costs have exploded so much is because of the government-backed loans.
yeah, yeah, and it, like any sort of credit system, people started taking that for granted, and people started using it for pretty much anything. And they're like, okay, I want a car, and I can't afford a car, so I'm going to, take out a loan. And what happens is when you again third party starts picking up the tab, the bank is like, we'll pay for it. You just be pretty much our servant for the next 30 years. You're in our debt, and we're like, yeah, cool. That's how everybody does it. So we're going to do it. And I feel like it's going to be doing it like cold turkey is going to be a painful transition, but slowly, I think we need to start taking control of our role in the free market. because we can't be just consumers like we've been, because it's not sustainable. We can't keep buying because we don't want to do without. If you look at a lot of immigrants that come in, or even a lot of people overseas, they do well without a lot of the luxuries, the things that we consider necessities. They consider luxuries, and they do well without them. But here we're like, okay, it's at our convenience. And so what if I have to work for the next year, 5 years, 30 years to pay off the loan that I got? It's like we pay for stuff with credit cards, we take loans on the house, we do this, that. Whereas, what's going to happen if tomorrow everybody just stopped buying and taking out loans? Okay, how long do you think those guys are going to keep the prices of the houses at 250,000, 400,000 if they're just sitting there? The prices will have to come down, but it's got to be a step. The ball is in our court. It's like, you want to keep
Right.
borrowing money, the prices will keep going up. But you stop borrowing money, okay, maybe you're going to have to rent a room from somebody. Maybe you're going to have to, rent, do one thing or another thing.
How
But
about
sooner or later,
multi-generational households, right?
yeah,
In America, and I guess in Europe too, to an extent, people, you turn 18, you move out of the house, or 25,
yeah,
whatever it is, you move out, which is not how it is in the rest of the world. The rest of the world have multi-generational households. They live together. It's a very normal thing for when you get married, you move in upstairs.
yeah,
So,
and
I think
it's
that we have
practical.
to exactly. We gotta start rethinking things. These numbers are quite astounding. The 26 trillion in personal debt, 34 trillion in national debt,
National
and
debt,
it
yeah.
seems overwhelming to the point where it's like, well, just F it, we're already that much in debt. Let's just ride this thing to the end. But
What's
you gotta think about it like a drug addict. Is that really, if you had somebody who you loved who was addicted to drugs, would you just be like, "You know what? Just go out there and, you got one life to live, so go get high if you want to, and who cares? You're gonna
Yeah,
die at some point." No, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is somebody out there who doesn't care, but I would say most sane people would not recommend that. And now, of course, going cold turkey is also a difficult thing and can even be a life-threatening thing depending on what your drug of choice is. But we
yeah,
have to start taking those steps slowly but surely, and not just pointing out at the government, and not just thinking that the next election, if we get our guy in government in the position, things are going to change. And we have to start looking in the
no,
mirror at ourselves and saying, okay, how can I use fewer government services? How
hmm,
can I, if there was to be some horrible accident or incident that happened that cut off our food supply, and we've, like you said, experienced some of these things in small tidbits, whether it was the storm in Texas, whether it was the lockdowns and the food and the supply
yeah,
chain got all messed up and we couldn't get some things. Are you able to survive not just on your own, but in your community? Do you know the people
yeah.
around you? How can you be more self-sufficient? And that is the modern revolution. Sure, yes,
I think
have
so.
your self-protection, have your arms and stuff, but they should only be used literally to protect your property, your own personal property. You don't need to go out and, do an insurrection on the White House. You don't need to go down to some border in a state that you don't even live in. You need to, when back in the day when Jordan Peterson was still on a, still still somebody who I watched and listened to a lot. Clean your room. Clean your
Yeah,
room. And I think if we clean our room, we'll find that the government will be forced to also start cleaning up some of their mess.
and at the very least, you're not going to need government to clean your room anymore, and they get out of your room, because you can't get them out of your room if you can't even organize your own room.
Yeah.
If you don't have order in your backyard, you can't tell anybody else to mind their own business. And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Is the it's fascinating because we're looking to the big government, to the people at the top, and we know what they're doing, and we know what's happening in their lives. We know Biden's daughter's diary, but we don't know the names of our neighbors. And it's like, why are we not building from individual out to family, out to the neighborhood, out to the community? We have no idea what's going on in our own backyard, but we know what's happening in the White House. We know what's happening in DC. We know what's happening on the Capitol Hill. And because that's where the real cultural battle takes place, it's in the communities. And that's something where we need strength and we need unity. Because if we keep looking to the mainstream media to tell us how America thinks, you'll go crazy. We're not meant to know what people we will never meet, what they think about us. Screw them. They're entitled to their opinion. I want to know who my neighbors are. Tomorrow something happens, I want to know who I can reach, who is within walking distance, driving distance, somebody I can reach over the phone, somebody I can look out and yell help, who's going to come to help me. I need these people in my life more than I need some bureaucrats up there somewhere deciding. And even when people start talking about the actual, like, oh, revolution, civil war, this, that, and the other, it will come down, the pivotal point will be local law enforcement, because that's what in some of the conflicts that we had when the governor of New Mexico decided to prohibit gun carry in Albuquerque, I believe, as a response to a shooting. The local law enforcement said we're not going to enforce it. That's what is going to come down to. In Arizona, they recently proposed this uh, com- uh, complete ban on abortion, and the local attorney general said, "I'm not going to enforce it." I don't know how much goes on in whatever their what the scope of their job is. I don't know if the AG can just willy nilly say, "I'm not going to enforce it," but if they want to, you're not going to stop them, right? So to that level is like knowing your own local law enforcement, knowing where they stand. Is like, are you going to enforce that? If something is unconstitutional, it's not, constitution is not magic, right? It's not some spell that automatically protects you. It all comes down to the boots on the ground, to the people who are either going to choose to enforce the constitution, or they will choose to enforce the rules, like you said, with CDC, the ATF. People familiar, gun people familiar with it, last year they decided to say that, hey, pistol braces are no longer going to be legal. You're going to have to register them as short barrel rifles, which was a rule. Like, they have no authority to make it, but if they choose to do so and they decide that they want to enforce it, it's like, okay, it's already like they do whatever they want to a point. You need to know who's on your side. So
Yeah.
even if it does come to that, you got to know who's on your side. You're not just going to go out there and be a Rambo in the woods. I don't know a lot of people who could. So you got to have your community. You have to know your people. And I think it kind of transcends everything from economics to healthcare to, we just need to start building our culture around us, around the family, around the neighborhood, around the community, instead of sitting in there and trying to get the guy elected who's going to force everybody else to do what you like doing. Like, hey, get up there and make them do what we want them to do. And then the next guy is going to come in and he's going to ban the other thing that those people didn't like. And now you have two things banned, and you're less free, and they're alternating turns, and more things get banned. At the end of the day, you're like, why did we start doing it? Why did we
Right, more
start
things
banning that
get
stuff?
banned, and they give themselves more power, and, yeah, it just becomes this whole cycle to where we get to where we are today. Um,
Yeah,
and, know your neighbors, know your people who are in your community, but that's not to say you can't know awesome people on the internet and have great conversations like we're having here.
yeah,
I
absolutely,
definitely,
absolutely.
yeah, learn a lot from you, push my thinking, show me some cool stuff over on Twitter. So make sure you're following this guy Murch. I have him linked in the description down below, so you can click on that and follow him. Of course, make sure you're following me on I'm on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram. If you're just coming through here on YouTube or on Rumble, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, or you're following to me, or you're following me. I think that's what it's called over on Rumble. And leave some comments. We've had Turable in here leaving some great comments. He said he started a neighborhood association. I also know that he's running for office, and he's going to be on the podcast in a few weeks. So that
Oh,
should
that
be
is
a good
awesome.
conversation. And yeah, I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody who's checking in. And these are the types of conversations I think that can really help us cut through that whole left right divide, find some unity, find some meaning in our lives. And really, I think it is important to talk about the American identity and what that means. So thank you so much for joining me and sharing
Thanks for
your
having me.
perspective and your knowledge. Awesome. And I'll be sure to catch you over on, I keep calling it Twitter because like I feel like X is so weird. I'll see you on X. Like, what?
Yeah,
Where?
the one letter thing is not is not
Yeah.
real. I don't know.
So
It's a
X,
little weird.
I'm calling it Twitter though. For a while I almost gave in, but then I was like, no, this is weird. All right. Anyways, until next time, I appreciate all you guys. I love your beautiful face. And remember, think free, live free, and give all the glory to God.